Okay, I'm a Depression baby. I was born in 1930. I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, in the height of the Depression, as a matter of fact, so much so that I was born upstairs in the front bedroom. And Dr. Green had delivered me, as did Pap-Pap. And he took charge of everything there. I never knew I was a Depression baby because we never really wanted for everything, even though Pap-Pap worked several jobs at Sparrows Point and then went hunting, and we took rabbits and scalped the rabbits and ate rabbits and did all those other things. But I do remember that at the time in Dundalk, the house cost $6,000. But the payments were such that when the monies would come in from Dad's pay, there'd be a little box, and it would be food, this, and all the monies, the dollars would go in there because the payments were $6 a month. But aside from that, I never knew anything, and I thought we were really very wealthy because in the kitchen we had a clock that it went clunk, 1 o'clock, the O, and the 1 flipped over. So that was very new and very modern, unlike the other clocks. Uncle Muggs lived with us, Mom's brother. We've had all of the uncles, Uncle Al, Aunt Helen. They all lived there at one time or another, and we also had boarders, even though we had a 3-bedroom house. The back bedroom was where the boarders or the uncles and aunts stayed. My 2 sisters, Pat and Barbara, we all had 1 bedroom. Mom and Dad had the front bedroom. We had 1 bathroom that we all shared.
Even the boarder?
Pardon?
Even the boarder?
No, oh, everybody shared it, yeah. We all everybody shared the bathroom. Although I was so little at that time, I don't even remember the boarders. I remember Uncle Muggs being there mostly, and Aunt Helen and the uncles being there. But then when Grandpap O'Donnell came to live with us and had a stroke, Dad changed the kitchen into his bedroom, and in the basement built a kitchen and put in another bath with a shower. Also during the war, the basement was such that a part of it was all dirt, and so Dad dug it all out and made an aviary out of it, and we raised canaries, and I remember picking the little strings off of the fibers and put them in the basket so the babies, the eggs would be laid, and we'd feed them with a little bit of spit and a little bit of egg yolk and feed the tiny ones with the toothpick.
What was the house like?
The house was a row house. Oh no, it was a row house. And one of the worst things about having a row house was we were never allowed to use the front door, and when you come home from school, this was of course later, when we came home from school we'd have to walk all the way around all the houses and go in the back door. And we thought this front lawn in the backyard was the biggest thing we've ever seen. A few years ago, my older sister Pat and Barb and I went back to Dundalk. You couldn't even get hardly a car down the street. It was so tiny, and the front yard was literally a postage stamp, but at the time when we were little, it seemed very big. Vitale's was the grocery store on the corner that we used. The one across the street was a little bit more expensive, so we didn't use that. And right behind that was what we called the Goose Lady, because she had was very forbidden type of thing, but she had a little patch of ground where she raised chickens and geese and things like that, and that was on the other alley. We had nice neighbors. One of the best things of all about Baltimore, and I remember during the Depression, well, that was the Depression, and as I say, I never remember that much ever being without anything. Pardon?
World War II ration?
No, that was then. Then came World War II. And with World War II, there were a lot of changes. Uncle Muggs lived with us at that time, and he became an air raid warden. One of the things, even prior to that, though, living in Baltimore on the 4th of July was the best holiday of the year, because at the end of the street, the parade for all of Dundalk, where Baltimore, Dundalk, Maryland, formed. And the tanks came, and the Army was there, the Navy was there, all the armed forces were there, as well as the Campfire Girls. I was a Campfire Girl, and the Boy Scouts, and we all marched and had a wonderful parade that ended up in Dundalk High School. And Dundalk High School then had the watermelon eating contest and bobbing for apples, and that night they had a grand dance in the street dance and also fireworks display, which was wonderful and ended up with Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and the American flag, and lots of beautiful fireworks. And for years, when we left Baltimore, which was in 1944, I was born in 30. In 1944, we would go back the first 2 or 3 years for the 4th of July because it was the best in the whole world. However, Uncle Muggs did not like it because he said that's what caused the rain the next day, all those fireworks, because it invariably rained right after that. But during the war, it was really different. We had rationing of hosiery, not important for me, but for meat, gasoline, butter, a lot of the essentials. There were stamps that you could get so much of anything that you needed, and if you ran out, you didn't have it.
So when did Papa go hunting? All that was in...
He went hunting the whole time and continued.
That was supplemental.
Before World War II, mostly before World War II, but after World War II, too. I mean, during World War II, he also went hunting, yes. And we had a victory garden in the backyard where we raised our vegetables. Everybody had a victory garden. Everybody raised vegetables in the backyard. Anything we could do to support
Well, what did you do with the vegetables?
the war. We ate them.
So you didn't give them...
Well, everybody shared what they had. Yeah, we shared, but we didn't barter or anything like that. It's just that, you know, we ate it. We had a good vegetable garden. Yes, but Pap was a good gardener.
What were the appliances like?
The appliances? Well, when we were younger, our icebox hung out the window, and the milk got big, froze in the middle, so the cream broke open the top. That's how we kept our refrigerator things cold. And then in the summer, we had an ice truck that would come by in the back alley. And we loved jumping up on the track and getting the chips of ice. And he would bring in either a 25-pound, usually 25-pound, because that's all it would hold. And that's what the appliances were. And we had a stove. It was a chamber stove that had a well in the back that made vegetable soup. And Nana, Mom, made vegetable soup all the time. That was our standard. And on Sundays, we always had a pot roast.
How long did the ice last? Did he come every day?
Oh, no, he came once a week.
So that whole block would last all week?
Oh, it would have to last all week, yeah. At least that's all I remember. Maybe he came twice a week, I don't know, but no. But he...
So did you have to shop every day?
No, we didn't shop every day. We just didn't have the kinds of... Sometimes we didn't have things like fresh vegetables and stuff. Milk was really the only thing that was really fresh, because and butter, but butter didn't, you know, spoil that quickly, because we had canned vegetables. We just didn't have, except what we grew, fresh vegetables like tomatoes and lettuce and things like that. I mean, that was a new phenomena that came later, and now we're all spoiled with all the things. We have immediate satisfaction all the time.
What about meats, though?
Meats. I didn't do the shopping for the meats, but I imagine since the grocery store was just down the street, when we had meats, we would go down there. But we did a lot of things like macaroni and cheese and things like that. Also during the war, we had blackouts. Blackouts because we had Glen L. Martin Airplane Factory, the Chesapeake Bay, with all the Army and the Navy, and close to Annapolis. And when I said blackouts, I mean absolutely, totally black. The windows would be screened, and if there was a pinhole, we would note it. I remember the one time Uncle Muggs went out and he started to light a cigarette. No, you just don't do that. Absolutely not. The sirens would go on, it would mean there was a blackout, and everything would be closed absolutely tight, and you'd never seen anything so black in your life as Dundalk was at that time. Then things got so that they needed more room for the Army, and they took what was Logan Airport, which was just 3 streets behind us. In fact, I remember as a kid, the planes would come in, and the one time they crashed in the row houses behind us with the 2 airplanes coming in to where the cellarway went, and Papa would go over periodically when this would happen and help save the people or carry them away if necessary. And we had an ashtray out of one of the parts of the airplane at one point. And people like Lindbergh landed there, and movie stars like Tyrone Power, when he was married to Annabelle, landed there. That airport was turned into a Army base, and they put up tents and they weren't barracks, they were really tents where the soldiers lived. The other thing we did during the war was we always had soldiers over for dinner on Sunday dinners and holidays. Hitchhiking was not unknown up there because people were always going from place to place. So that was pretty much the war. It was, again, I was young enough to be able to participate in the fun part of helping to serve the soldiers at Logan Field and having them over for dinner, and too young to do the Red Cross bandaging and things like that. But it was a service kind of thing that we did, and never really suffered, never felt the loss of food or automobiles or any. It's something that everybody just did. And after World War II...
Did you hear about what was going on?
Oh, all the time. We had radio. We had a telephone. Our telephone number was Dundalk 217. And of course it was a party line, because we all had party lines. And we had a radio that was in the dining room. Our house had a living room, and there were heavy velvet curtains that separated the living room from the dining room because of the cold. And the steps came down the stairs into the living room, and then into the dining room, and then there was a kitchen, which we thought was big, which was probably very small. And in the dining room to the left was one of those radios that went like this. And of course we loved listening to Let's Pretend, and Nana listened to the First Nighter. We listened to First Nighter, and Nana listened to the daytime serials. But at, I don't remember, it was 5 or 6 o'clock, Lowell Thomas came on, and that was, everybody had to listen to Lowell Thomas because Uncle Muggs listened to Lowell Thomas. Dad was always off working someplace, so he wasn't there, but I remember we always had to give up either that to listen to Lowell Thomas, and that's how we heard about and we took, there were 2 newspapers, the Baltimore News-Post and the Post, and I want to say Herald Examiner, but that wasn't it. But we took the Post, and Edwards next door took the other newspaper. One was liberal and one was conservative. Ours was a liberal newspaper. At that time, my father was very much of a Democrat. And that's how we heard about the war and all the things that were happening. There was no thought of television. In fact, many years later, when my kids said to me, I said, we didn't have television. Well, they said, did you have radio? Yes, of course we had radio. I'm not that old in our time. Then in around that was the war, and in 1944, we moved to Toledo, Ohio, which was a total change in everything in terms of our social, our economic, our whole future. Pap was invited by his brother, Tom Dolan, to come and work in the American Floor Company, and he became vice president of American Floor. Prior to that, he had engineered, founded a few patents and things for Bethlehem Steel, which Bethlehem Steel kept. I still have the patents upstairs, though. And had, even though he did not have the schooling, because I don't know how much you want to hear of this, but he was one of 9 children, and his father had a bad back injury and was in a wheelchair, and Grandpap Dolan was 6'6", and so Pap did not go past 6th grade because he had to quit and go off and help the children, because he was the second oldest of the family. Uncle Tom did get to go to school, but Pap didn't, but he had to see that the other kids did. And as a result, he was what you call a self-made man. He learned, his stories are wonderful about how he learned his engineering and how he learned to glaze windows and how he learned to seal floors, and some of the stories are riotous because he pretended to do things he couldn't do, and then they'd come in and say, have you done this before? And he'd say, of course, I'm just trying a new technique, or something to that effect. But anyhow, he was quite a man. And so when he was invited to do that, we did move to Toledo, Ohio. And I can remember the one time he said something to the effect that the man came in and said, he was hiring engineers. And engineers sometimes are hard to hire and sometimes they're overflowing. Well, this time, whatever it was, he was interviewing this engineer, and he said, my father, and where did you graduate from? And he said, MIT. Maryland Institute of Technology, of course, which there is no such place. But he was not really intimidated by that situation. But when we moved there, it was a social class. It was difficult for Nana to adjust to because she had made all of her friends while we were in school. And Pat was going into college, and I was going to high school, and Barbara was going into the 7th grade. And we had always gone to parochial schools. Pat went to downtown Baltimore, which was an hour streetcar ride. I can regress and tell you when she'd go downtown, the train would go, streetcar would go down, and then it would be the cane seats, and flip the seats, and then she'd come back home. But it took an hour to get downtown. I only got to go once or twice because of the Blessed Mother. There was a special thing that I was awarded, and I still remember going into the convent and going to Mass that morning, and I had a bandana over my head because I had curlers, and I fainted. I was so embarrassed when they took off my bandana and I had curls in my hair, but I was going downtown that day. But that was one of the things. And some of the other things we did, Tommy Doyle lived 2 doors down, and Tommy and I got into a little bit of difficult now and then. For example, the one day they didn't know where we were in Snake Hole, which was the local swimming hole. They thought for sure we'd taken our bikes and drowned in Snake Hole, and they couldn't find us. They finally found us. We were just biking around. And we would do things like go pick the dandelions and the weeds and go to the streetcar when it would come and sell our bunches of flowers to the people as they'd come for a penny or two. We would put on plays in the basement. We had the clothes props that you used to hold the laundry up with in the cellarway, and we'd slide down those. We'd take buckets of water and offer to paint people's houses. We really had a lot of fun until the day I slid down the clothes pole and got a huge splinter in my bottom. And the worst part of all was they put me on the ironing board, and everybody in the neighborhood had to come in to see how to get that splinter out of my bottom, and that was the end of the clothes post. So anyhow, we had a great time there. But that was kind of a little different society and a little different than it was in Toledo. When we moved to Toledo, we lived on Prospect, and I went to Notre Dame, Pat went to Toledo, and Barbara Marie went to St. Anne's, which is now Martin DePore's school, but it was the Catholic school that we walked to. And Notre Dame really changed my life, especially Sister Ginevra, who was the art teacher there, because I always thought I would like to do art. She limited the number of people in her art class. After the first year, she said, forget it, don't come back. So that summer, on our trip to 4th of July to Baltimore, or Dundalk, I sketched everybody, everything, and she was so surprised I got to stay in the class. But she really was very instrumental in my whole attitude toward life and all the things I aspired to. She was really wonderful. And aside from that, things were rather routine. We spent a lot of time after school because we spent a lot of time in the art class. It was post-war period. I was not that aware of all the other things that were going on internationally. I was pretty much tied into Notre Dame and my activities there. We had 2 CYOs, which is Catholic Youth Organization things, and would go over to the east side. We were on the west side on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that's where we'd meet the guys and dance and, you know, that sort of thing. And it was every Tuesday and Thursday. My first date was as a sophomore on the feast of our Blessed Mother. We had the Immaculate Heart dance, and I dated Jimmy Schlageter, and we continued dating through high school up to the prom. And my only regret is that my senior year in the prom, that he's not going to ask me to him, so I asked somebody else, and I regretted it all the time. Particularly since we had worked very hard on our decor for our prom. Pat Flint's dad, we had a secret thing, we the committee, you know how those things go, and we did stardust, and we had a bridge that went across the middle and a pond that was artificial pond, of course, but we placed the stars in such a way that only we knew where these stars were and what they indicated. We were pretty snobbish, I guess. Didn't mean to be. But our high school was very close, and even to this day, having gone back for the last number of years, I said, we've got to see each other. So we did, and I have pictures going back a long time that every time I went back, I'd have all the Notre Dame gals over. And to this day, they meet at least once a month, so it's really fun. It's a very close-knit group of girls. Let's see, what else do you want to know about? We had radio. Then, I can remember with television, we always thought Uncle Tom was so rich because he lived in Old Orchard. And I remember after I was married, coming to Toledo for a visit, and Uncle Tom was there, and we talked about television. I said, "You don't have color television?" Well, I don't even think it was color television. I think it was television. He said, "No, I don't have television." And I was really surprised because we thought everybody at that time would have television, especially Uncle Tom, because he was probably 1952, 54, because the one we had was one of those tiny little things. And in fact, I met your father, met Andrew, at TU. When I went to the University of Toledo, I decided my older sister had gone there and had graduated, and I decided I was going to run for office. But I came from Notre Dame, a small little Catholic school. Little did I know about the big politics of a, quote, big university, which at that time was 6,000 students, and it had exploded because all of the, there had been 2,000 and 3,000, but all the servicemen were coming back at that time, 1948. But I didn't know I was running against what they called combines, of which your father was one of the ones for the independents. And so I had tiny little, cute little pictures around campus, while these other people had these big, huge posters, and needless to say, I lost. At any rate, later on, I met your father. He was very prominent in the political arena, as well as the dramatic arena. There was, at one point, when he was not liked very much by the business community, because there was a fraternity on campus that was an honorary fraternity that didn't want to admit blacks, as I remembered it. And he said, "We cannot do this." And he went downtown and he filibustered and all kinds of things. There are pictures of it and stuff. So he was very active politically, as well as in terms of drama. He played Othello and he played all kinds of Shakespeare and the other roles. I decided that I wanted to act a little bit, so I got to play the gentle lady when I was there, tiny little parts. But I worked on costumes and things like that, and did study in addition to doing whatever social things.
What was your major?
Pardon?
What was your major?
My major was psychology. And I pledged Pi Phi, which was just a wonderful thing that I did, because not only did I have fine friends there, but later when I came to California, it became sort of a place to bond with other people, because I came out here as a complete stranger and met other people who, to this day, 46 years later, are very fine, good friends. But my senior year, I discovered the head of the psychology department, Dr. Henderson, was actually a, what do you call it, education, doctor of education. And believe me, the field of education is not very challenging, nor was the psychology field. And I thought, what am I doing wasting my time in psychology here? So I transferred to Ohio State, which was another big, major change in my life. Really just did wonderful things, opened up all new landscapes. And people who say, oh, big colleges aren't good. All it does at a big university is allow you the alternatives to do other things, I think. At any rate, so I went there and decided I've been going to school an awful long time, so I applied for work at the faculty club, which was wonderful because the faculty club provided an opportunity for me to meet not only faculty members but other people who were working and serious students, and anyhow it was just a great time. My dramatic situation there was a little bit different than it was in Toledo. I shyly sat at the back of the auditorium the one time and tried out for a play, and I was chosen as the lead, and that happened repeatedly at Ohio State. And I thought, here I am in this huge university, but it was really great. And again, through that, I met some nice people. I met some people that weren't terribly, they were very independent in that they were all on scholarships. I ended up with a scholarship in the drama department too. Two of them, as a matter of fact. One is a teacher's assistant, and then later, when I was working on my master's, doing one of the shows. But the people that I met were all struggling, working on scholarships, or weren't funded by somebody. So I ended up cooking for a group, and we fashioned ourselves as the artists. And once a week we'd go out and buy the food, and then each night I would cook dinner for this group of people. I became a very good fast food cook. The professors we met, I met one of the people that came from Toledo with me was Martha Weiler, and Martha came, and at the time Charlie Chaplin's movie was going to be shown at the local theater. Charlie Chaplin, unfortunately, had been tied into the communist movement, and this was called, and I'm trying to think what the name of the movie was, but it had nothing to do with that. It was kind of a silly, sentimental thing. But they weren't going to let it show because he was there, so Martha and I got a petition up among everybody. And one of the things we did to the faculty member, do you want to sign this? And the amazing thing is, some of these very liberal faculty members in chemistry and head of the departments and even just teachers, we can't do that because suppose at one point in the future I want to get a job with the government and they found that I did this, and they would not sign because they thought they were intimidated. This was all part of the McCarthy problem that had happened earlier on with McCarthy and all the people in Hollywood being condemned for their association with the communists. So it was kind of an eye-opener for all these people who we thought were so liberal and would get right in there and try to get the show done. But even though we ended up with tons and tons, hundreds of signatures, they would not show the movie. It wasn't First Nighter, but it was something like that. Then I met your father.
You guys met before you transferred to Ohio State?
Yes, we met.
Were you dating then or no?
Well, yes. We met when, in 1949, actually, we met. And we knew each other through the theater. And then, yes, we did date all the first 3 years before I went to Ohio State. And then your dad came out here. Well, actually, your father traveled with Clare Tree Major Drama Shakespeare Group and traveled throughout and ended up in California, which is another whole story, which you must get from him because it's really fascinating. And he would come back periodically, and we exchanged notes, and I continued to date, and I think he continued to date, but we decided that this was to be. However, I finally thought, this is ridiculous, this isn't going to happen. So the one Christmas, was it Christmas, I was to go up and help Aunt Pat because Peggy was born, and I went up to help take care of Peggy, and I had a date with a fellow who was going to come up, and your father showed up with an engagement ring and said, shouldn't we get married? I said, well, whatever. And I said, well, okay. So I called Bill and said, Bill, I don't think you better come. And I left Aunt Pat with Peggy and dirty diapers and went home to tell Nana and Pap-Pap that we were engaged. So we were engaged for about a year, and then his father died, and he came back for that. And at that point, Aunt Catherine and Uncle George had been dating, and in the Greek tradition, when the parent dies, you must wait a year until after the oldest son is married, unless you marry on the same day. So we were to be married June 30th, so Uncle George and Aunt Catherine decided they too would be married on June 30th, which they were. So they were married on June 30th, 1956. So it was a long-term romance, and we had 8 years or so, and I guess it was just about that, although not always in town, but it was there. Actually, in Jackson, Michigan, he picked me up and we drove over to the, what's the waterfall called there? The, in Jackson, you know, anyhow, and we drove in to the park and he gave me the ring and the policeman came and said, you're not allowed to park here. So we left and went back to the Cascades in Jackson, Michigan, that are very famous. And that was that, and then we got married and came out here. Actually, I know you want to hear a little bit more about what's happening in the world, but
no,
I wasn't. Yeah, things were, when I was at Ohio State, I was very much involved in school and drama and theater. I was a psychology major, got my degree in psychology, decided I'm not going to go because I've watched these guys. In order to get your degree in psychology, you have to go and get your master's and then your doctorate, and I didn't think I was up to that. At one point, when I was involved in this, I went back to Dundalk, Maryland, if I can regress again, and I guess it was probably between my sophomore and junior year, deciding I'd do social work in Baltimore. That's what I wanted to do. They didn't want people who volunteered. They didn't want people who even not volunteer for work. They wanted experienced people. So as a result, I ended up working at the Glenn L. Martin Airplane Factory in the office there, and working and staying with Rose and Jim Burke, who lived on Halliburton Avenue, right at the top of where the Army base was. Other than that, during high school, I did work. I worked at Lickendorf's Hardware store. I worked at the Pennsylvania Railroad downtown, where I switched trains, but I did it in the office, not out in the tracks. And the more you think, and you know, as things pass, but they're the things. I had a friend who had tuberculosis. It was at the William Roche Hospital that I went out to see on a very regular basis, and we are still in contact. I hear from him at Christmas with his family. Many of those relationships are still intact. Anyhow, so when we came out and when we got married, Aunt Catherine got married, so I got dressed. We had a little bit of a reception. I left, went over to the Greek church, got my wedding dress back on again, had pictures there, and then got undressed and went back to our house and got dressed again for the rest of the reception, and then left for our honeymoon. We went to Chicago, and I just found the bill from our hotel the other day, and I think it was something like $3.52 for a night. And that morning I got up and crossed the railroad tracks and went to Mass and came back, and Dad called the taxi cab to take us to the airport. The taxi cab driver was not very happy because it was just kind of a mile away. However, we did, and when we got to the airport, my engagement ring was gone. I was very thin at the time. I had lost a lot of weight. I was about 100 pounds. So we went back to the hotel, and there it was in the shower. The housekeeper was cleaning the room, and there was the ring in the shower. So I got my engagement ring back. Then we got on the airplane, and it was right after the big air crash in the Grand Canyon. And we got on the airplane, and the pilot said to the stewardess, "You know what they say, divided we stand, united we fall." And half the plane was empty. This was United Airlines, still propellers and stuff. But we took off anyhow, and beyond the point of no return, suddenly the one propeller stopped, and there was fire, and oh dear, what are we going to do now? So we landed in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and spent the night standing in the airport because there were no places to sit down because the people that were on the plane had come from New York, and they were little kids and stuff. So we ended up out on Then Dad was actually to do a show that Sunday night, but we missed the show because we were standing in the airport. He was working for Confidential File. So when we got in Monday, still remember we went down to Hollywood Boulevard and ran into the gentleman that owned the tobacco store. And he said to your father, "Gee, I didn't think you'd marry somebody like that." So I'm not sure exactly what he meant. But anyhow, he did say that. And Dad had gotten an apartment that Anna Mae Wong had owned and still does, or the apartment is still there. It was a Chinese apartment, and you walked in and there was a Buddha and incense and creepy, because here I am. What am I doing here? So shortly after that, a day or two later, I went scouting and found an apartment above a garage that was not too much farther away from that spot, but it was more expensive. That one was $95 a month, and this was $110 a month. But it did have 2 bedrooms and 2 baths, and it had a lovely garden that you looked over. And the landlady insisted on feeding the cats in 5 and 6 different dishes. However, while we were there, we did get our own little first Lance dog, which was a mistake, but we got her anyhow because it was hard to train her in the house, and we were both working. I was teaching and Dad was working. But that's where he made the deal for Stakeout on Dope Street. And we were there. Uncle George came out and spent some time with us because he was looking to get in the real estate business, I think, at the time. But he and Aunt Catherine drove out. So they were here on their honeymoon when we were here. And they stayed in Dad's old apartment, which was right down from Grauman's Chinese on Sycamore and Franklin, looking up at the Japanese place and the Magic Castle. It was that's where the place is. It's no longer there. But a lot of famous movie stars lived there when he was there. People that I don't know, but you would probably know, or other people would know, that he lived with when they were there. Then he did Stakeout on Dope Street. He made the deal and moved to the duplex on Kilkea. Told Mr. Israel that yes, he shot pictures. He thought he meant shot pictures, and moved in with cameras and big thing. Oh, what's going on? I thought you were making movies. And that's what they did. And Haskell Wexler came out, and Irving Kershner, and they shot in the streets, and they did all those things. I made bologna sandwiches. They climbed out of windows when the people with unions would come, but it was great, and they ended up selling the show to Jack Warner. And then subsequently, Dad and Irv went to Warner Brothers, but the kind of movies they wanted to do, Mr. Warner didn't want. He wanted them to shoot on the set, and they didn't want to do it. So, in the meantime, I was teaching in Pasadena, John Muir High School, teaching English. Actually,
why did you decide to start teaching?
I'll backtrack again. When I was at Ohio State, I got my degree in psychology, and then I thought, I'm spending all my time elsewhere. So I did a year of graduate work in English, lit. Discovered I was spending all my time in the theater. So got my master's in theater. When I went back to Toledo, there really wasn't anything much I could do, so I taught at Ursula College, which is Marymount's, which was a small girls' college. And of all things, I taught social studies, how to teach social studies, and I taught ethics of nursing, and one other English class, which is kind of strange. And at that time, I started working on my degree, and that's where I met Aunt Bev for education. I thought, I'll never want to do a teaching. I don't want to teach. Took my degree, got my degree in education, and Bev and I drove to Chicago, applied with this gentleman for jobs in California because I was getting married, and she thought she wanted to come out here too. So we applied, and we got her assignments. I was assigned in Southgate to teach social studies. I got here and I thought, Southgate, I'm living in Hollywood. Not only that, social studies. I don't know anything about social studies. So I told them, nope, not going to take that job. Instead, applied to Pasadena and taught English and drama and study skills and things like that in Pasadena, and thoroughly enjoyed it. And then I got pregnant and stopped teaching and started raising a family.
Now, for world events, when was Korea? Did that affect you guys at all?
I was raising a family. I guess I was kind of immune to most of the things that were going on in the world as far as Korea, Vietnam.
So McCarthyism had an effect on you.
Pardon?
McCarthy had an effect on you.
Well, yeah, but that was when I was still in Dundalk. The McCarthy thing was still in Dundalk.
No, that was after you moved.
That was after World War II. Well, that was. Trying to think. What? No, it was because of the McCarthy thing that these people had that reaction. But McCarthy really happened earlier on. I'm trying to think whether it was right after. It was right after the war, probably in 1945 and 46 when we were in Toledo. Because I can remember coming home from school and watching, because we did have television, and watching the hearings and stuff. Yeah, but that was before We went to Ohio State.
Korea was when you were in college.
And Korea was when we were in college, but we weren't really affected by. When I was in freshman, sophomore, and junior in college, that wasn't Korea because that's when the war, people were coming back from World War II. That's when Uncle Norm came back. That's where Aunt Pat met Uncle Norm. And actually, in 1948, when I went, it was just the tail end of the college people. They were there from 44, 45, 46, 47, and by 48 they were just leaving, but the school had grown at that time. But no, the Vietnam and Korean, I was clueless. I was involved in probably lesser important issues than I am now in terms of the internet, being aware, I should say, of that national and international things.
When did you see the technology change? When did that happen?
The first technology change was when I was taking a class at Ohio State, and the professor said, "One day we will have colored television." We went, "You're kidding, colored television?" When we lived in Dundalk, the Edwardses, who lived next door to us, had a full television, not a table model, and on it there was this thing about the size of two of my thumbnails that had like a screen, like this was going to be a TV screen. Just think one time there's going to be a picture there. Our television in Toledo, because we didn't have any, of course, in Baltimore, in Toledo was a small round screen as I remembered it. And I don't remember when we first got color television, but I remember talking about it.
Little refrigerators.
Oh, well,
Machines,
in Baltimore, eventually, we no longer had the ice truck. We had like a Cervell electric, it was called Frigidaire. That's where refrigerators got their name, I guess, Frigidaire. You call it a Frigidaire. We eventually had a Frigidaire icebox. At first, the ice went into the top, and you had to make sure you emptied the bottom all the time. And I don't remember whether we had an electric, ever had a freezer part in that or not. I don't think that we did until we moved to Toledo. And when we moved to Toledo, on Prospect, again, I was busy in school and doing other things and not that involved in all of that. When we moved to Meadowood, then Nana and Papa remodeled their kitchen, and they had those wonderful cabinets that are still famous. And I want to say Chicago, like the Chicago cabinets. And they redid the kitchen there with gas stoves and regular refrigerators. By that time, things were just expected to be that kind of thing, But as far as technology, first going from the typewriter, when we were in high school, we took typing, not electric, regular typewriters. Electric typewriters, I remember Erica working for Dad with the IBM typewriter, the electric typewriter. I value those skills that I learned because now, with my little bit of computer stuff, it really helps. I don't know how people do it without. I guess they do the punch and stuff. The big changes, I remember when the Cinerama Dome opened, and Bernie Kowalski's son was involved in east of Java, and west of wherever that movie was, the big one that they did about the earthquakes. I mean not the earthquakes, but the mountains that erupt. The volcanoes, yes. Something of it, and east of Java was the movie that they made, and that was the first one we saw at the Cinerama Dome. The other have kind of creeped on us, like the computers just started being, and the telephone just started being, and I still don't quite understand all of it. Your father understands even less than I. I do remember, though, when we first got our first, I don't know whether it was called VCR at the time, but I remember going down all the time to Amatron because I had the AB box, and I would hook it up, and it wouldn't work, and I'd go down, and they'd tell me what to do, and I'd have to buy the new part, and that's how I got whatever was working there. Was that a VCR at that time? Yeah? But you had to have the A-V thing, and you'd switch it from one and switch it to the other to get the thing work. That was very early on. I guess there were a lot of changes. The first motion picture camera we had was an 8mm, and we shot Gina as a baby and Johnny as a baby, and I still have some of that films, and Pap did a lot of those films. And as soon as we got our 8mm, they'd made it Super 8, which meant it had just a little bit of hole, a little bit different sprockets. As soon as you got that, that didn't work any longer, and we went to the 16mm, so we've got those upstairs, and the same worked with their regular camera. The automatic cameras. I did, when I was in high school, did win a prize when we went to Washington, D.C. as our senior trip with Dad's Mercury camera. I took a picture of Abraham Lincoln, black and white, of course, but it was one that you had to adjust the openings and the settings and all that stuff, and the camera's still here, and it probably works just as well. In fact, there's film in the camera. It'd be interesting to see what's in there at one point. Speaking of that camera, when we got married, our wedding pictures were in black and white, and many years later, Dad Pap had worked out a machine whereby instead of having to put things on little cards, he invented some kind of a wheel that he left the film intact. And then when he'd show the film, instead of it going clunk, 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 he'd just turn it, and we could see all the film that way. So many years later, that roll was still in the cassette, and he sent it here, and I had them developed. The color is absolutely perfect. Those pictures are just gorgeous. It's just amazing how they didn't fade or any of the other things. They were just wonderful. Maybe it was because they were kept in the cassette and not put on little slides, whatever. The other technology, as far as the motion picture and VCR and DVD, it just keeps running ahead of us and changing. So I don't know if there's anything else here. This, you know, I could get into the politics of the, you know, the civil rights movement. I think there was a need for some of that, just as there was a need for unions at one point. You know, people shouldn't be trampled on. But on the other hand, when something is no longer necessary, I don't think you should just continually fight it to the point. I don't believe in the schools being segregated, and I don't believe, though, that we should have, I'm losing it. I don't believe we should have the quotas. I think that's ridiculous. I think people need to stand on their own merits. I think you're doing an injustice to people when you say, well, you can't make it unless you're given special things. Even for the people that are no longer called, the Crippled Children's Society is now called Special Interests. It's not called Crippled Children anymore. It's Special Needs. It's called the Special Needs Group. And I think a little more honesty sometimes is more helpful. Breaking the sound barrier was wonderful. Today I still can't think of how people are unaware that some of these scientific things are happening. For example, some of the school books, I understand, still say sometimes we'll walk on the moon. Every time I hear about these people going up into outer space and it's being so casual, it just seems strange to me when they first went and walked on the moon. They first got up there. I think it's one of the most wonderful things. And people that perhaps think that it's a waste of money to do all this outer space, not true, because all of the advances in medical and other fields that have come back as a result of this additional research is invaluable. I just think it's very essential that we continue that, not frivolously, just for the heck of it, but because I really think it has some scientific value.
What effect did that have? I mean, why?
Well, for one thing,
it was obviously competing with the Russians, but why? The competition with the Russians wasn't so much. It was just that it was proven that we could do it, that man could go actually out there. And his words were important too. One step for mankind, one step for God, one step, important step for mankind, to know that there are vast things out there that are yet to be done and explored. And you know, I don't have this, oh, you're nearing the end of everything. I don't get that at all. I think we're just opening up to new things. Forget the cloning. That's awful. Terrible things happen when that happens, without getting into that. But I think that the scientific experiments of going into outer space are just wonderful. And the Apollo, Gemini, Mercury, if you want just to go and look, and I just find it amazing that people can take that sort of thing for granted. Just take it for granted. Now, a new woman is going to be going up on this next flight. She hasn't already left. Hiroshima was terrible, but I think it was necessary. I think that had it not happened, the war would have gone on and on and on, and many more people would have died unnecessarily. The assassinations are dreadful, what's happening now with the Palestine and Israeli. It's just, and people are so pointed in one direction to the other that they don't seem to see that there is a chance of living together. And I still blame Mr. Sharon, because had he not gone in to that wall 2.5 years ago, they were making great progress. And I don't know what's going to happen there. And the Irish, I think they are working toward, and I think eventually, I think it is a matter of time, but I think in another 10 years you'll find a united Ireland. I'm hoping so. Word processors and everything have just changed everything in the world. I mean, you know, okay. Oh, let's face it, it has to be for better. You know, it has to be. It's like the Industrial Revolution. You know, when they had to go to machines, people were misplaced, but those people that were misplaced eventually found new employment, and it became more investigative in terms of things that could be done. And I think the same is true now. It's true. People are going to be replaced by computers and by the kinds of things that they were talking about. The Port Authority, the unions say so many people are going to be out of work, and it's true, but it's more efficient, it's better, even though now and then they break down. One of the funny things, though, the Bergmans that we met up at the desert introduced us to a gentleman who said one of the newest things in the banking industry, which will save the customer much time and a lot of money, are the ATM machines, because people won't have to go inside. They will be able to do some of their transactions outside, and it will save the people a fortune. Well, of course, what's happened, it is true that they now don't have to go inside, but they have penalized people with their ATM. It is making the banks a fortune, because you're being penalized if you use a teller. You're being penalized if you go to a different place. So, you know, that's one of the changes that I don't use an ATM, because I frankly think you lose track of what you're doing. But no, I think that computers, are, even though they do make mistakes occasionally, have certainly made life a lot easier for an awful lot of people.
Okay. Anything else?
Anything else you want to ask?
That's good.
I can get into my children. I've got 6 kids. In Loyola and school and things like that. But that's another whole, you know, day.